I found my son chained in a basement on Christmas Eve. Above him, his wife's family was throwing a party in his own house, drinking his wine, eating his food, spending his money. They'd been poisoning him for 8 months and stealing nearly $1 million from his trust fund, and they thought I'd never find out. I'm Ted Whitman, 66 years old. I built CyberShield Industries from nothing into a $15 million cybersecurity company. I've spent 4 decades hunting hackers, fraudsters, and criminals who think they're smarter than the system. But I never imagined I'd find my biggest threat sitting in my own son's living room, celebrating Christmas while he was dying in chains 20 feet below them. When I walked into that basement and saw Christopher hooked to an IV drip, skeletal thin, barely conscious, whispering, "Dad, I knew you'd come." That's when everything changed. These people had declared war on my family. They just didn't know they'd picked a fight with someone who's made a career of destroying people who think they can't be caught. My son's wife thought marrying him gave her access to his $2.8 million inheritance. Her family thought a sick old man would never figure out their perfect medical fraud scheme. They were about to learn that there's no security system in the world stronger than a father's love for his son, and no revenge colder than a cybersecurity expert who's just watched his child nearly die while criminals partied upstairs. If you want to see how I systematically destroyed every single person who hurt my boy, and why you never, ever underestimate what a desperate father can do with unlimited resources and 40 years of hunting experience, you're going to want to hear this story. Because justice came with interest. The story starts 3 months earlier when I first noticed the cracks. Christopher had always called on Sundays, ritual we'd kept since his mother died 3 years ago. September 15th, the calls stopped. October brought excuses. Work stress. Melissa needed him for family events. Doctor's appointments that seemed to multiply. By November, I was talking to voicemails. I founded CyberShield Industries in 1982, built it into a $15 million company protecting Fortune 500 networks. Retirement at 66 should have meant peace. Instead, I found myself analyzing my son's communication patterns like a threat assessment. Christopher was 33, a software architect at Emerald Tech, making 6 figures designing cloud infrastructure. Smart kid, too smart to just disappear. The warning signs were subtle, the kind I'd trained corporate clients to recognize. Email responses grew shorter. His usual technical questions about server configurations stopped. When I drove to his house in Bellevue that Thanksgiving, Melissa answered the door with practiced concern. "Ted, Christopher's been struggling with anxiety. The doctor says family pressure might be triggering episodes." Melissa Cooper Whitman, 29 years old, pharmaceutical sales background, married my son 2 years ago after a whirlwind romance. I'd had reservations, not about her personality, but the speed. Christopher had introduced her in March, engaged by June, married by September, but after losing his mother, he needed happiness. I kept my concerns to myself. Standing in their doorway that November afternoon, watching her block my view of the interior, I should have trusted my instincts. Behind her, I caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces. Her family, she explained. Extended visit for the holidays. Christopher appeared briefly, looking thinner, speaking in careful sentences about managing stress and needing space to heal. And the Christopher I raised would never use therapeutic language that formally. I left business cards on their coffee table, contacts for the best anxiety specialists in Seattle, offering to pay for whatever treatment he needed. Melissa gathered them up immediately. "We're handling it privately," she said. "Family approach works best." That night, I called Christopher's work direct line. His colleague, Jake Morrison, picked up. "Ted, Chris hasn't been in for 2 weeks. Medical leave. Melissa called it in. Said he was having some kind of breakdown, needed extended treatment at home. 2 weeks." Christopher hadn't mentioned medical leave during our 5-minute conversation. In my experience, when people start controlling information flow, they're usually controlling the source. I spent December trying to respect boundaries while my security training screamed warnings. Christopher's social media went dark. His LinkedIn showed currently taking time for family priorities. About it. I drove past the house twice. Melissa's mother's car parked permanently in the driveway, lights on at all hours like someone was providing round-the-clock care. December 22nd, I made a decision. Family boundaries were important, but not when they might be covering abuse. I'd seen enough corporate security breaches to know that systematic isolation was usually the first step in larger schemes. Time to treat this like an investigation. I started with public records. Patricia Patty Cooper, Melissa's mother, had worked as an ICU nurse at Harborview Medical Center until her license was suspended in 2019 for medication discrepancies. Vernon Cooper, the father, carried a criminal record. 3 DUI convictions, 1 domestic violence charge from 2018, currently unemployed. Bank records, what I could access legally through my business connections, showed gambling debts exceeding $40,000. These weren't the loving in-laws helping with Christopher's mental health. These were people with serious financial pressures and access to medical knowledge. December 24th, Christmas Eve, I decided to stop respecting boundaries that might be protecting predators. I had no idea my son was already dying. Christopher's house sat dark when I pulled into the driveway at 8:47 p.m. The smart doorbell I'd installed as a housewarming gift stayed silent, unusual, since the motion sensors should have triggered a welcome message. I used my emergency key, a decision that would later save my son's life. The front door opened to music and laughter from what sounded like a full party. Netflix played holiday movies in the living room, where I counted 8 people I'd never met before, all around Melissa's age, some holding drinks, others playing cards at the dining table. The scene looked normal, festive even, except for one detail: no Christopher. "Ted!" Melissa appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of cookies like she hadn't spent 2 months blocking my access to my son. "What a wonderful surprise. Christopher's just resting upstairs. The holidays can be overwhelming for people with anxiety disorders." She gestured toward the staircase with maternal authority, but her eyes held calculation. I'd seen that look in corporate boardrooms when executives were running numbers on hostile takeovers. This wasn't concern. This was management. "I'll just say hello," I said, moving toward the stairs. Actually, the doctor strongly recommended against unexpected visits. Consistency is crucial for his recovery. She positioned herself between me and the staircase. "But we're having such a lovely time down here. This is my family. Mom, Dad, my brother Kevin, and his wife." I scanned the room while she performed introductions. 8 people consuming food from Christopher's kitchen, using his electricity, occupying his space. Not one asked where the homeowner was, or expressed concern about his absence from his own Christmas Eve gathering. The smell hit me as she talked. Under the sugar cookies and mulled wine, something medical, antiseptic. I'd smelled it enough times visiting my wife during her cancer treatment to recognize hospital-grade cleaning products. Why would a house need medical-level sanitation? "Where exactly is Christopher?" I asked. "Sleeping upstairs," Patty Cooper answered from the couch. She was a heavy-set woman with graying hair and the confident tone of someone used to managing medical situations. "I've been monitoring his condition. Former ICU nurse," she added, like credentials would settle my concerns. "I'll peek in quietly." "Absolutely not." Vernon Cooper stood up from the card table. 6'2", construction worker build, the kind of man who used physical presence to end arguments. Melissa explained the situation. Kid needs space. Space from his own father. On Christmas Eve, while strangers partied in his house. "I'm going upstairs," I said. Vernon moved to block me. "No, you're not." That's when I noticed what was missing from the scene. Christopher's car keys weren't on their usual hook by the door. His wallet and phone weren't on the kitchen counter where he always left them. The house felt occupied but not inhabited, like a movie set dressed to look like normal life. "Where's his car?" I asked. "Shop," Melissa said quickly. "Transmission problems." I pulled out my phone and called Christopher's number. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang once, then stopped. Not upstairs. Somewhere below us. "I think that was the basement," I said. The room went quiet. 8 people stopped talking simultaneously. Not the gradual lull of normal conversation, but the instant silence of coordinated deception. Basement phone's probably just an extension, Kevin offered. Old houses have weird wiring. I walked to the basement door. Locked. New deadbolt that hadn't been there at Thanksgiving. Christopher had never locked interior doors. Said it felt claustrophobic after growing up in our open concept house in Mercer Island. Why is this locked? Safety precaution, Patty said. Christopher had some episodes earlier this month. We don't want him wandering around unsupervised when he's disoriented. Episodes. Wandering. Disoriented. Medical terminology that painted my sharp, successful son as mentally incompetent. I'd seen corporate security teams use similar language to justify removing executives before hostile takeovers. I had two choices: leave and call authorities based on suspicion, or push harder and risk escalation. My security training said collect evidence first. My father's instincts said my son needed help now. I need the key. Ted, you're being unreasonable, Melissa said. This is exactly the kind of family pressure that triggers his anxiety attacks. Give me the key or I'm calling 911. Vernon stepped closer. You threatening us in our house? Your house? The slip hung in the air like smoke. Vernon's face darkened as he realized what he'd revealed, but it was too late. This wasn't visiting family helping with care. This was occupation. Territorial ownership of property they had no legal right to control. Christopher's house, Melissa corrected quickly. We feel responsible for it while he recovers. I'd had enough. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Sir, please state your emergency. I need police at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, Bellevue. I believe my son is being held against his will. That's when I realized this wasn't just greed. It was murder in slow motion. Vernon lunged for my phone, but 42 years of staying calm under pressure served me well. I stepped back, kept talking to the dispatcher, and watched 8 people scramble to control a situation that was already beyond their control. Melissa produced a key with shaking hands. The basement smelled like a hospital room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on walls that had been freshly painted white. Medical white. Institutional white. The kind designed to show blood and stains clearly. This wasn't the finished recreation room Christopher had described when he bought the house. This was something else entirely. I found my son chained to a hospital bed in the corner, IV line running into his left arm, monitoring equipment beeping weakly beside him. 33 years old, reduced to maybe 140 pounds, skin the color of old paper. His eyes opened when I approached, glassy, unfocused, but aware enough to recognize me. Dad? His voice was a whisper. I knew you'd come. The IV bag hung half empty, clear liquid that should have been saline or glucose, but smelled wrong. Sweet, chemical, like the industrial solvents I remembered from my early engineering days. I followed the line to his arm and saw the insertion point was infected, red and swollen from poor care or contaminated equipment. Christopher tried to sit up and couldn't. The chains weren't decorative, heavy gauge steel, the kind used in industrial construction, padlocked to eye bolts that had been professionally installed in the concrete floor. Someone with construction experience had built this prison. How long? I asked. He blinked slowly, processing the question through whatever chemicals were clouding his mind. Months. Started with pills for anxiety, then shots, then this. I checked the monitoring equipment. Heart rate 45 BPM, dangerously low. Blood pressure 90/60, hypotensive. Oxygen saturation 94%, concerning for someone his age without respiratory disease. This wasn't medical care. This was systematic organ suppression. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Melissa appeared, followed by her mother, both wearing expressions of concerned caregivers caught in an awkward situation. Ted, I know this looks alarming, but Christopher asked for restraints, Melissa said. Self-harm prevention. Dr. Rodriguez recommended it after the last episode. What doctor? Private practice, specialized in family-based care for severe anxiety disorders. I'd spent enough time in corporate due diligence to recognize fabricated credentials. Name and license number. Patty stepped forward. As his medical advocate, I don't think sharing private health information with unauthorized family members is appropriate. Unauthorized family members. I was Christopher's father, his emergency contact, his power of attorney for medical decisions. At least I had been before this started. Someone had clearly done paperwork to change those designations. Who authorized this treatment? Christopher consented, Melissa said. We have documents. Documents. Signatures. Legal authorization for medical imprisonment. I was looking at systematic abuse with professional planning and legal cover. My son hadn't been kidnapped in the traditional sense. He'd been slowly, legally disappeared. I knelt beside the bed and took Christopher's hand. His skin was cold, pulse thready. Can you understand me? Most of the time. Clearer now than usual. They gave me less today because of the party. Less sedation because guests were coming. They'd calculated the minimum dose needed to keep him compliant while maintaining the fiction of voluntary treatment. This wasn't medical care or family concern. This was a business operation. Christopher, do you want to be here? No. Clear answer, no hesitation. Want to go home? This is your home. He looked confused, then focused on the basement around us. This is different. Used to be my workshop. They built this after Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving. After I'd visited and asked questions they couldn't answer. They'd constructed a medical prison in my son's own basement to hide him from family oversight. I stood and faced Melissa. This ends now. Ted, you don't understand the complexity of mental health treatment. Christopher needs intensive supervision. He needs a hospital, real doctors, and you need lawyers. That's when I heard sirens outside. They had turned my own technology into their weapon. The police response was swift but complicated. 2 patrol units, an EMT team, and a supervising sergeant who'd clearly handled domestic disputes before, but nothing quite like this. Christopher was coherent enough to request medical transport, which simplified the immediate crisis, but opened larger questions about how long-term medical abuse had gone undetected. Detective Laura Mitchell arrived as the EMTs were preparing transport. Mid-40s, 15-year veteran with domestic violence specialty training. She took one look at the basement setup and called for the crime scene unit. Sir, I need to understand the timeline here, she said to me, while Melissa and her family waited upstairs under patrol supervision. When did you last have normal contact with your son? September 15th. Last regular phone call. And you were aware of his mental health issues? I was told about anxiety, medication, family-based treatment. I wasn't told about imprisonment. She photographed the IV setup, the chains, the monitoring equipment. This level of restraint, who authorized this? They claim Christopher consented. They mention a Dr. Rodriguez, private practice. We'll verify credentials. What's your son's financial situation? Smart question. Follow the money. Trust fund worth $2.8 million, maturity at 35, currently managed by my attorneys at Hayes & Associates. Detective Mitchell made notes. Who benefits if something happens to your son? His wife, according to the marriage documents, unless... I stopped, realizing something I should have checked months ago. I need to verify the trust paperwork hasn't been altered. We'll need a full financial audit. This has the hallmarks of systematic exploitation. I rode with Christopher to Swedish Medical Center, watching EMTs work to stabilize vital signs that had been artificially suppressed for months. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Kim, ran blood panels that revealed industrial-grade sedatives, not psychiatric medications, but chemicals used in veterinary surgery or industrial applications. Whoever did this has medical knowledge, Dr. Kim said. The dosing was calculated to maintain consciousness while preventing resistance. This isn't amateur hour. I thought about Patty Cooper's nursing background, her suspended license, her confident medical terminology. ICU nurses knew exactly how to manage sedation levels, how to maintain patients in controlled states, how to document care that would pass casual inspection. Christopher spent 3 days in intensive care, while his system cleared chemicals that should never have been in human bloodstream. During those 3 days, I began the investigation that would destroy the Cooper family's carefully planned operation. My first call was to Benjamin Hayes, my attorney for 27 years. Ben, I need you to audit every piece of paperwork Christopher has signed in the past 6 months. Trust modifications, power of attorney changes, medical authorizations, insurance beneficiaries, everything. Ted, that's a massive undertaking. Are we talking about fraud? We're talking about systematic theft disguised as medical care. Ben's team found the paper trail within 48 hours. Christopher's power of attorney had been transferred to Melissa in October, signed during what the medical records described as a severe anxiety episode requiring family intervention. His trust fund access had been modified to allow emergency medical expenses without oversight from my attorneys. Life insurance beneficiaries had been changed to exclude me entirely. Most damaging, a series of documents declaring Christopher mentally incompetent due to severe anxiety disorder with paranoid features. This legal framework had allowed Melissa's family to make financial and medical decisions without outside oversight. Total transferred so far, $890,000 in medical expenses paid to companies that didn't exist. Shell corporations registered in Vernon Cooper's name, all supposedly providing specialized anxiety treatment services. The investigation expanded from medical abuse to sophisticated financial fraud. Detective Mitchell coordinated with federal authorities because the crimes crossed state lines. Some of the shell companies were registered in Nevada, others in Delaware, creating jurisdiction complications that suggested professional criminal planning. This wasn't opportunistic, Detective Mitchell explained during our third meeting. They researched your son's financial situation, identified vulnerabilities, and executed a long-term extraction plan. The medical imprisonment was just the control mechanism. I learned other details that turned anger into cold determination. Christopher's work laptop had been accessed repeatedly to download financial documents. His email had been redirected through servers controlled by Vernon Cooper, explaining why my messages never reached him. His cell phone had been cloned, allowing them to monitor all communications and intercept calls from anyone asking questions. The basement prison had been under construction since July, 3 months before Christopher's supposed anxiety diagnosis. Building permits had been pulled for a home gym with medical equipment for rehabilitation therapy. Vernon Cooper's construction background had provided professional knowledge for creating an undetectable prison. Most chilling, they documented everything. Melissa kept detailed medical logs describing Christopher's treatment progress, complete with photographs showing his deteriorating condition. In their minds, they were providing legitimate care while managing his financial irresponsibility. The delusion was systematic and complete. They'd constructed an entire reality where Christopher was sick, they were caregivers, and the money they were stealing was earned compensation for providing essential family support. They thought they were hunting a grief-stricken old man. They were about to learn the difference. I spent the next 72 hours deploying every resource I'd built over 4 decades in cybersecurity. First priority, stopping the financial bleeding. Second priority, documenting the full scope of criminal activity. Third priority, making sure they faced consequences that would prevent them from targeting other families. Benjamin Hayes assembled a legal team that included financial crime specialists, estate protection attorneys, and prosecutors from both state and federal jurisdictions. Our strategy was systematic dismantlement. Attack their operation from multiple legal angles simultaneously, preventing them from choosing which battlefield to defend. Step 1. Emergency trust modification. We filed court documents freezing all remaining assets in Christopher's accounts and reversing the power of attorney transfers. This required proving Christopher's signatures had been obtained under duress. Easy enough given the medical evidence of systematic sedation. The toxicology reports alone will invalidate any document signed after September, Hayes explained. No one in that condition can provide informed consent for legal contracts. Step 2. Asset tracing. We hired forensic accountants to follow the $890,000 through the Shell Corporation network. Federal banking regulations required transaction records, and the Cooper family hadn't been sophisticated enough to hide the money properly once it reached their personal accounts. The trail was obvious to experienced investigators. Money went from Christopher's trust to fake medical companies, then immediately transferred to gambling websites, luxury car purchases, and Vernon Cooper's court-ordered restitution for previous legal problems. They'd used my son's inheritance to pay off their existing debts. Step 3. Evidence preservation. I contracted with CyberShield's Digital Forensics Division, the team I'd built to investigate corporate cyber attacks, to analyze every electronic device in Christopher's house. The scope of surveillance they'd installed was extensive and documented. Christopher's smart home system had been completely compromised. His security cameras were recording, but not transmitting to his monitoring service. His digital assistant was programmed to ignore voice commands from anyone but Melissa. His thermostat, door locks, and lighting were controlled remotely from Patty Cooper's phone. They'd turned his own house into a monitoring prison, using technology I'd helped develop to isolate and control him. Most importantly, they'd been sloppy about electronic communications. Text messages between family members revealed the planning timeline, financial motivations, and coordination of Christopher's imprisonment. Vernon Cooper had sent detailed construction photos of the basement prison to his brother, describing it as a medical facility for managing difficult patients. Melissa had exchanged hundreds of messages with her mother about managing Ted's interference and keeping Christopher compliant until the money transfer was complete. The digital evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. Step 4. Coordinated arrests. Detective Mitchell worked with federal prosecutors to time simultaneous searches of Cooper family residences, preventing evidence destruction or coordination of alibis. December 30th, 6:00 a.m., FBI and local police executed search warrants at 4 locations. Vernon and Patty Cooper were arrested at their apartment in Renton. Melissa was taken into custody at a motel in Tacoma, where she'd been staying since Christopher's hospitalization. Kevin Cooper and 2 other family members were arrested as accessories. The evidence seizure filled 2 trucks, financial documents, medical supplies, construction tools, computers, containing detailed records of their operation. Most damaging was Melissa's diary, where she documented Christopher's treatment progress with clinical detachment, describing his weight loss, psychological deterioration, and reduced resistance to medical management as positive outcomes. By 8:00 a.m., news crews were covering the story as a case study in tech-enabled elder abuse. The irony wasn't lost on local media. A cybersecurity expert's son had been victimized using digital surveillance tools. The legal proceedings moved quickly, with Christopher's testimony, medical evidence, financial records, and digital communications. Prosecutors had an overwhelming case. The Cooper family faced federal charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and elder abuse. Melissa's breakdown during the first court appearance was complete. Faced with 20-year federal sentences, she abandoned the medical care fiction and blamed her family for pressuring her into the scheme. Her testimony described months of planning, detailed research into trust fund management, and systematic psychological manipulation designed to isolate Christopher from his support network. Vernon Cooper showed no remorse. During his plea hearing, he described the operation as providing legitimate family care while recovering expenses. His criminal thinking was so distorted that he genuinely believed stealing $890,000 was reasonable compensation for imprisoning and poisoning his son-in-law. Patty Cooper remained defiant until prosecutors threatened to charge her under federal elder abuse statutes, which carried mandatory minimum sentences for healthcare workers who exploit patients. Only then did she acknowledge that her medical treatment had been systematic torture designed to facilitate financial theft. The investigation revealed other victims. Patty Cooper had used similar methods against elderly patients during her nursing career, gradually increasing their medication while convincing family members that aggressive treatment was necessary. Her license suspension had resulted from an investigation into suspicious patient deaths, but criminal charges hadn't been filed due to insufficient evidence. Christopher's case provided the evidence pattern prosecutors needed to build racketeering charges against the entire family network. But the hardest part wasn't getting justice. It was living with what I'd missed. Christopher's physical recovery took 3 months. Organ damage from prolonged chemical suppression required specialist care, but Dr. Kim was optimistic about full recovery. The psychological healing would take longer. I kept thinking you'd given up on me, Christopher said during our first real conversation since his rescue. They showed me emails where you supposedly said I needed tough love and time to mature. They had text messages from your phone saying I was an embarrassment to the family. Fabricated communications. They'd created fake correspondence to convince Christopher that his family had abandoned him, making him more dependent on their care and less likely to reach out for help. The psychological manipulation had been as systematic as the medical abuse. I never sent those messages. I was trying to respect boundaries I thought you'd set. I never set boundaries. I was asking for help, but they intercepted everything. My work emails, my phone calls, even my medical appointments. Dr. Rodriguez doesn't exist. They created fake appointment confirmations to explain why I was missing work. I learned about months of gradual isolation. First, Christopher's anxiety medication had been replaced with industrial sedatives. Then his work performance had declined due to cognitive impairment, leading to medical leave that gave them complete control over his schedule. Finally, they'd convinced him that his confusion and memory problems were symptoms of severe mental illness requiring intensive family supervision. The worst part was believing I was losing my mind. They kept detailed records of everything I said and did, then showed me how irrational and paranoid I'd become. I started thinking maybe I really did need the treatment. The gaslighting had been professional-grade psychological abuse. They'd used medical terminology, official documentation, and systematic record-keeping to create an alternate reality where Christopher's imprisonment was legitimate health care. I found a letter in my wife's papers, one she'd written but never mailed before the cancer got too bad. Ted, I'm worried about Melissa. She asked too many questions about Christopher's inheritance, and her family seems very interested in our financial arrangements. Please watch out for him after I'm gone. My wife had seen the threat I'd missed. Her motherly instincts had identified predatory behavior that my trusting nature had dismissed as normal in-law curiosity. If I'd found that letter earlier, or if I'd listened to my own security training instead of trying to respect family boundaries, Christopher might never have suffered months of abuse. The guilt was overwhelming some days. I'd spent 42 years building systems to protect corporations from cyber threats, but I'd failed to protect my own son from family predators using the same systematic approach. Dad, I never stopped believing you'd figure it out, Christopher said during one of our evening conversations at Swedish Medical Center. Even when they convinced me that everyone else had given up, I knew you wouldn't stop looking. That's what kept me going. Then Christopher said something that changed everything. I want to help make sure this doesn't happen to other families. Christopher moved back to my house in Mercer Island during his recovery, sleeping in his old bedroom while we figured out next steps. The Bellevue house was a crime scene for several weeks, then became a place neither of us wanted to revisit. We put it on the market and used the proceeds to fund what would become our most important project. Working together for the first time since his teenage years, we designed a comprehensive system for detecting and preventing tech-enabled family abuse. Christopher brought software architecture expertise. I contributed cybersecurity protocols and business relationships with law enforcement agencies. The result was Family Guard, a monitoring system that tracked financial transactions, communication patterns, and medical authorizations for warning signs of systematic exploitation. We beta tested it with elder care services, disability advocacy groups, and domestic violence organizations. The technology already exists, Christopher explained during our first presentation to Seattle Police Domestic Violence Unit. Smart home systems, financial monitoring, medical record tracking. The problem is integration and interpretation. Most abuse happens gradually, below the threshold that triggers individual warnings. Our system looked for patterns, unusual medication changes, combined with communication reduction, power of attorney modifications during unexplained medical episodes, financial transactions that benefited caregivers more than patients. Red flags that human investigators might miss, but algorithms could identify reliably. Detective Mitchell became our first law enforcement partner. We see this type of abuse more often than people realize, she said. Usually it's discovered after the victim dies, when estate attorneys notice suspicious transactions. By then it's too late for criminal prosecution. Family Guard's early detection could save lives and preserve evidence, while law enforcement could still intervene effectively. Christopher's recovery accelerated as we worked together on the project. Having a purpose beyond his own healing seemed to restore the confidence and energy that months of systematic abuse had stolen. He was becoming himself again, the brilliant, innovative son I'd raised. 6 months after his rescue, Christopher started dating again. The relationship moved slowly, with both of us hypersensitive to warning signs of predatory behavior. Sarah Chen was a network engineer at Microsoft, financially independent, with family connections Christopher could verify independently. Most importantly, she encouraged his relationship with me rather than trying to control it. Their first Christmas dinner together was at my house, with Sarah helping to prepare our traditional meal while Christopher told embarrassing stories about my early computer programming mistakes. It felt like family again, chosen family, built on trust and respect rather than obligation or financial dependency. The Cooper family faced justice through multiple judicial systems. Federal wire fraud convictions resulted in 8-year sentences for Vernon and Patty Cooper. Melissa received 5 years due to her cooperation with prosecutors and demonstrated psychological manipulation by her family members. Asset forfeiture recovered $720,000 of the stolen money, though legal fees and Christopher's medical treatment consumed most of the remainder. More important than financial recovery was the legal precedent. Tech-enabled family abuse was now recognized as a distinct category of crime requiring specialized investigation techniques. Christopher testified before a Senate subcommittee on elder abuse, describing how existing technology could be weaponized by family members with medical or legal knowledge. His testimony helped pass legislation requiring stronger oversight of power of attorney transfers and financial transactions involving vulnerable adults. The people we trust most have the greatest opportunity to harm us, he told the senators. Traditional law enforcement training focuses on stranger danger, but family abuse uses intimacy and trust as weapons. We need different tools to detect and prevent it. But there was still one test I needed to pass. 18 months after Christopher's rescue, Melissa wrote from federal prison requesting a mediated meeting. She wanted to apologize, she said, and make amends for her role in his abuse. Christopher was conflicted. Part of him wanted closure, part feared additional manipulation. She was my wife, he said. I loved her, even though she nearly killed me. I don't know if meeting her would help or make everything worse. I faced my own moral complexity. Melissa had orchestrated Christopher's imprisonment and systematic poisoning. Her family had stolen nearly $1 million while documenting his suffering with clinical detachment. Every protective instinct told me to keep her away from my son permanently. But Christopher was an adult, capable of making his own decisions about healing and forgiveness. My job wasn't to control his choices, but to support whatever path helped him recover fully. We arranged a supervised meeting at the Federal Correctional Facility in SeaTac, with Christopher's therapist present and recording equipment to document any threats or manipulation attempts. Melissa looked older than her 30 years, wearing standard prison clothing and no makeup. The confident pharmaceutical sales representative who had charmed my son was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely broken by the consequences of her choices. Christopher, I know saying sorry isn't enough, she began. I convinced myself we were helping you, that you needed protection from making bad financial decisions. But I know now that was just justification for what we wanted to do anyway. Christopher listened without interrupting while she described her family's financial pressures, her mother's gambling addiction, her father's criminal debts. Not excuses, she said. just context for how they'd rationalized systematic abuse as legitimate family care. "The worst part is that I did love you," she said. "I married you because you were kind and successful and everything I wanted in a partner. But when my family needed money, I let them convince me that stealing from you is somehow different from stealing from a stranger." "How long was it planned?" Christopher asked. "From before we got married. Mom researched your family's financial situation when we got engaged. She found out about the trust fund and started talking about how irresponsible it was to give that much money to someone so young. By the wedding, she had me convinced that managing your inheritance was a wife's responsibility. Systematic predation from the beginning. Christopher's entire marriage had been a long-term financial scam disguised as romance. The love he'd felt was real, but it had been returned with calculation and exploitation. "Do you understand what you did to me physically?" Christopher asked. Melissa nodded, tears starting. "The medical records from your treatment. Dr. Kim sent them as part of the victim impact documentation. Organ damage, malnutrition, chemical dependency. I was killing you slowly. But you kept detailed records like it was medical care. Mom convinced me it was legitimate treatment. She had medical training, used professional terminology, made it seem like we were providing specialized care that hospitals couldn't offer. I believed the lies I was telling because they came from someone with authority." Christopher was quiet for several minutes. Finally, "What would you need to do differently if you ever got out of prison?" "Complete psychological evaluation and ongoing therapy, financial crimes counseling, restraining order preventing contact with your family, supervised contact only if you ever decided you wanted that." She looked directly at me. "Ted, I know you'll never forgive me for what we did to Christopher, but I need you to know that your son fought back every day. He never stopped asking about you, never believed that you'd abandoned him. His love for you kept him alive when the chemicals should have killed him." I found myself believing her, not the apologies or the promises, but the testimony about Christopher's strength during his imprisonment. It matched what I'd seen during his recovery. Resilience that came from deep family bonds they couldn't break, despite months of systematic abuse. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between justice and mercy. Christopher decided on conditional reconciliation with strict boundaries. Melissa would complete her sentence, undergo psychological evaluation, and accept permanent financial monitoring to prevent future exploitation schemes. Contact would be limited, supervised, and entirely at Christopher's discretion, not forgiveness, accountability with the possibility of redemption if she proved capable of genuine change. "I don't forgive her for nearly killing me," Christopher explained later, "but I forgive myself for loving someone who turned out to be predatory, and I'm choosing not to let anger about the past limit my choices about the future." Vernon and Patty Cooper received no such consideration. Their crimes had been calculated, their remorse non-existent, their risk of reoffending too high for safe reintegration. They would serve full sentences with permanent restraining orders preventing contact with our family. "Some people change," Christopher said. "Others just get better at hiding what they've always been." The legal framework we established became a model for other families dealing with tech-enabled abuse. Christopher's case demonstrated that systematic financial and medical exploitation could be prosecuted successfully when proper evidence collection and legal coordination were applied. 5 years after Melissa's sentencing, she was released on parole with strict conditions: psychological counseling, financial monitoring, employment restrictions, preventing access to vulnerable adults, and supervised contact protocols for any interaction with Christopher. Christopher had married Sarah by then. Their wedding was small, focused on family and friends who'd supported his recovery rather than creating social media moments or impressing distant relatives. I walked him down the aisle, proud of the man he'd become despite everything he'd survived. Melissa attended Christopher's wedding reception via video call. Her parole terms prevented travel to Washington, but Christopher wanted to include her in his healing process. She looked healthy, employed as a customer service representative in Phoenix, living in a supervised apartment while rebuilding her life. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that people can change, she said during the brief call. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm grateful for the chance to prove I've learned from the worst thing I've ever done. Christopher didn't respond directly, but he didn't hang up immediately either. Progress toward healing wasn't the same as restoration of relationship, but it was movement away from bitterness toward something that might eventually resemble peace. This Christmas marks 6 years since I found my son chained in his basement. We celebrate at my house now, with traditions that honor both recovery and resilience. Christopher and Sarah cook dinner together while I handle technology setup for video calls with friends around the world, many of them families we've helped through Family Guard's abuse detection systems. The basement in Christopher's old house has been renovated twice by subsequent owners, but I still remember exactly how it looked that Christmas Eve. Medical white walls, industrial restraints, monitoring equipment, beeping warnings that no one was authorized to hear, the smell of antiseptic mixed with fear. These days, the only chains in my son's house hold back Christmas stockings. I spent 42 years protecting companies from cyber threats. Turns out the most dangerous hacking happens inside your own family, using love and trust as access passwords, exploiting the vulnerabilities that come from caring about people more than security protocols. But I also learned that the same systematic approach that builds effective cybersecurity can protect families from predatory abuse. Trust, but verify. Love, but monitor. Forgive, but never forget the patterns that put people you care about at risk. Christopher still calls every Sunday, not from obligation now, but from choice, the kind of family connection that survives systematic attempts to destroy it. Our conversations cover everything: his work designing secure communication systems, Sarah's promotion to senior engineer, their plans to start a family, my continuing efforts to expand Family Guard's reach to underserved communities. We talk about technical problems, family memories, future possibilities. Normal father-son conversations between two people who understand how precious normal can be when you've almost lost it to predators, wearing the masks of people who claim to love you. The legal consequences from Christopher's case continue to influence prosecution of tech-enabled abuse cases nationwide. Vernon Cooper died in prison 2 years ago. Heart attack brought on by diabetes and high blood pressure he'd refused to manage properly. Patty Cooper is serving her remaining sentence in a federal facility in California, with parole eligibility in 2029. Melissa's rehabilitation appears genuine, though we maintain verification systems that would detect any return to predatory behavior patterns. Christopher describes their current relationship as cautiously cordial, acknowledging shared history while maintaining protective boundaries that keep both of them safe from unrealistic expectations. I don't need her to be the person I thought I married, Christopher told me recently, but I can respect the person she's choosing to become now that she understands the damage she caused. Recovery isn't the same as restoration. Justice isn't the same as revenge. And family isn't defined by genetics or legal documents, but by the people who show up consistently when you need protection, support, and love without conditions or ulterior motives. Family Guard now operates in 12 states, with partnerships among law enforcement agencies, healthcare systems, and financial institutions. We've helped identify and prevent more than 200 cases of systematic family abuse, protecting vulnerable adults from predators who use technology, medical authority, and legal manipulation to isolate and exploit people they claim to care about. Christopher leads the technical development while I handle business relationships and legislative advocacy. Working together on something larger than our own healing has strengthened bonds that predatory abuse tried to destroy. We're closer now than we were before the attack, not because trauma brought us together, but because surviving it together revealed what family connection really means. Trust, but verify. Love, but protect. Forgive, but never forget. These aren't just cybersecurity principles. They're the foundation for any relationship that needs to survive predators who use intimacy as a weapon and exploit the vulnerabilities that come from caring about people more than protecting yourself. My son calls every Sunday not because he has to, but because he wants to. That's the difference between obligation and love, between family bonds that can be broken by systematic abuse and connections that grow stronger when tested by people who mistake trust for weakness. Some lessons can only be learned through surviving what almost destroys you. But once you know how to recognize predatory patterns disguised as family care, you also know how to build protection systems that keep genuinely caring relationships safe from people who see love as opportunity rather than responsibility. The basement is empty now. The chains are gone. And every Sunday at exactly 3:00 p.m., my phone rings with the sound of a son who knows his father will always answer, no matter what threats emerge from the people who claim to love us most.